first question we have to ask ourselves is this, is that what possessed your parents to call you Rowena?
I asked myself that question for years when I was growing up. And my dad was reading Ivanhoe when I was born.
Yeah.
And he thought it was a beautiful name. And he was in love with the heroine. And so I became Rowena.
Could have been worse, of course, because your younger sister's called Ada.
Yeah, I know.
And that really is old-fashioned, isn't it?
It's very old-fashioned, and she thought it was a fine name until we were wandering around a graveyard, Victorian graveyard, one day, and she discovered that all the people she'd ever seen called Ada were dead, and they'd been dead for about 80 years.
I think we could take it a bit more serious in terms of your upbringing as well, because obviously, as we mentioned earlier, you're from Northern Ireland, you're a Protestant. Growing up in Northern Ireland, you weren't allowed to play with Catholics, and everything back then was segregated. There's a few younger people in the audience as well. It's almost a surprise to hear of such an existence. But just tell us about your upbringing and what it was like growing up in Northern Ireland in those days.
I think it wasn't true to say I wasn't allowed to play with Catholics. There simply weren't any around. I never met them. Education was completely segregated, so I went to Protestant school. I lived in the countryside. The only Catholics I was sort of vaguely aware of when I was an adult, before I realised that, ran the pub up the road. Yeah. And it was really only when I went to work, actually, that I started to meet other Catholics and realised there's a different religion and a different way of living.
Did you hear, like your parents, for example, talk a lot about religion? Did you hear other people talk a lot about religion? Were you defined by your religious views?
Not by religious views, no. That was the tribal thing. It wasn't really about religion deep down. We're talking about the late 60s now. And, there were immense economic inequalities in Northern Ireland. The Protestant hegemony ran everything. And so it was much harder for Catholics to make progress in life, actually. And I was horrified by the inequality of it. Absolutely horrified by it. Based on nothing other than religion.
We'll talk about your life in England, and we'll talk about more particularly your life in Manchester later as well, but I always think it's the life that people don't necessarily know about that is actually as equally interesting as well, because you trained as a nurse and you were working in Belfast, and you must have seen some pretty harrowing sights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were the years of the big bombings in Belfast, and everybody had stories. I lost friends in pub bombs and things.
As somebody who was at Old Trafford on Sunday, I can almost think about that myself. 20 years since the Manchester bombing as well. Do your experiences as a nurse, 'cause I think you were a nurse for about 4 years in Belfast. If you look at the Rowena Burns now, do you think part of that shaped your life?
Not consciously. I think maybe they started an interest in health issues. What it gave me, actually, was a real hatred of patriotism and nationalism in all their forms.
You decided to go to university in Aberystwyth, which is what every girl from Northern Ireland dreams of, I'd imagine. You went to Aberystwyth and went to university, and you made a discovery about yourself. And I know you're too modest to say it, you were actually really clever. What was... Bright. And incredibly modest.
It wasn't difficult to be bright in Aberystwyth. No.
Have we got anybody from Aberystwyth in the room? But
I love Aberystwyth.
What was it like to discover actually that you were quite clever?
I discovered a love of learning, actually. That's what I really discovered in Aberystwyth. Studying was brilliant, and I loved writing. In
terms of the doctorate, you ended up going to the Equal Opportunities Commission because you did some research which you looked at the fact that women with credit cards were being penalised based on a scoring system, and once you exposed it, you changed the system. Just tell us a bit about that.
It was women's inability to get credit cards that was the issue, and I palled up with American Express, and they were very interested in this, and we ended up we co-wrote a document together, and they changed their rules, and actually most of the other major credit card issuers and banks followed suit. Now,
you came to Manchester, you said you followed the man, and you went for a job at Manchester City Council, as it is now. You were interviewed by the Chief Executive, Roger Taylor, and a little-known man called Howard Bernstein.
Yep.
What was that like, and what was the Howard like then?
I went to be policy officer in the newly formed Greater Manchester Passenger Transport Authority, which is the forerunner of TfGM, which everybody knows now.
What was the Howard like then? Because he obviously he's driven Manchester forward.
Exactly as he is now. Utterly focused on Manchester and the job in front of him.
of course, Manchester was touched by a bomb of its own 20 years ago this year. You remember hearing the bomb go off, and Sir Howard took the lead then, didn't he, really? And he had this attitude that, let's get the city back to work. What do you remember about the immediate aftermath of what happened, but also Sir Howard and Manchester's resolve to get back to work as quickly as possible?
There was immense vision and prescience in Howard's response to the bomb. The sense of partnership and shared purpose that was already starting to flourish in the city came into play full force. You know, within 24 hours, the whole professional community had turned out, was attending 2-3 times daily meetings in the town hall. We became a workforce that was dedicated to reopening the city centre. And that sense of shared purpose was amazing to see and to be part of. It's a real privilege to be part of it, actually.
I'd like to thank Rowena. I think you've spoken about every aspect of your life and you've been really candid as well with it as well. Big round of applause for Rowena.